be agreed to. I call the member for Throsby.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. There's a very simple proposition before the House. The simple proposition before the House is this, Deputy Speaker, that if an employer or another wants to come to the government and say, we require access to a particular type of visa which was designed to address labour market shortages, skill shortages, then they must be required to demonstrate to the Commonwealth, to the government, to the minister, that there is indeed a shortage and that there is no worker, no local worker who is ready, willing and able to fill that position. A very simple proposition, Deputy Speaker. There is no local worker who is ready, willing and able to fill that position. Now, when stated like that, you find it very, very difficult to disagree with the proposition. Very difficult to disagree with the proposition, Deputy Speaker. And is it any wonder that in their contributions to the debate today they haven't addressed the proposition? In fact, they've stooped to their normal cant of casting aspersions on the motives behind those who bring the proposition before the House, their allegiances, their friendships, in fact their former employment, even their country of birth. But do they address the question before the House, Deputy Speaker? No, they don't. The question before the House is a very simple one, and it should enjoy the support of all members in the chamber. I'll be very surprised if it doesn't. A couple of weeks ago, Deputy Speaker, the member for Batman gave a speech in this House. He described it as his first and last speech as a backbencher, and it was a speech that enjoyed applause from around the House. And he said something that really stuck in my mind. He said that his priority and the priority of any Labor government should be to get Australian workers into quality jobs that pay well, that are secure jobs, and use that as a vehicle to lift their standards of living. He said that had been the driving force behind all of his work in public life. That is a statement, that is a proposition which I wholeheartedly agree with, Deputy Speaker. Indeed, to achieve that, you need to have a strong economy. You need to have effective markets. You need to intervene in those markets where they don't deliver fair and just outcomes. It's why, indeed, we have awards and collective agreements. It's why we have workplace regulation. But in 2013, Deputy Speaker, Australia stands above just about every other advanced economy in the world. We have strong growth, we have low unemployment, we have low inflation, we have strong public finances, and we have quality public services. Deputy Speaker, it's not unique in the last 150 years that Australia has relied on the skills and capacity of workers from overseas to build our cities, to man our factories and to staff our hospitals and surgeries and our offices. Indeed, the region that I come from has the steelworks, just like the steelworks and the metallurgic industries around the country, Whyalla, Port Kembla. On any day you walk into any of the departments within the BlueScope Steelworks and you'll find workers from every country on earth just about. The Snowy Hydro mountain scheme again was built relying quite heavily on the skills and capacity of workers from around the world. You drive past the Kingsford Smith Airport in Sydney and you see the residue of the market gardens that once were extensive throughout that region, again providing a food supply to the people of Sydney for over 100 years, owned and operated by workers from overseas. The auto workers of Geelong, in fact, the examples could go on and on and on. It is clear that the wealth and prosperity that we rely on today, that in fact that we are so proud of today as Australians, has been built on the efforts and achievements, the skills and capacities of workers who've come from all around the world. Of course, these haven't always been glorious episodes. The exploitation of bonded labour is one that stands out. But generally speaking, Deputy Speaker, the workers have come from other countries. They've made a fantastic contribution of where we've embraced them and all they've brought to the country that they've helped to build. The temporary skilled visa was a further iteration in this 150 years of skilled migration coming to this country. I don't know if it's been mentioned in this debate, yes, but by way of history, the history of the skilled migration, the temporary skilled visa, which we now refer to as the 457 visa, has its history in the Roach Report, a report commissioned by the Keating government and relying on the input and the skills and the knowledge and consultation with key business people. And it was to address the recommendations of the report were many, but in part they identified the need to address skill shortages in the short term by introducing a new class of visa, but over the long term, obviously, investing more money in skills and training of our domestic workforce. The visa wasn't introduced by the Keating government. After the 1996 election, the Howard government introduced the first 457 class of visa, and it has been in existence in that statute ever since. It's designed to help businesses who are struggling to find skilled workers locally, to sponsor workers from overseas so that those businesses and the economy as a whole can continue to grow in a tight labour market. Like most schemes of this type, Deputy Speaker, they must continue to be monitored and adjusted as circumstances change and weaknesses emerge. And we've identified 3 weaknesses. The first is a lack of a requirement to test the local labour market. And indeed, when I've spoken to people in my electorate, in fact when I've spoken to many men and women in the press gallery and others, they've been quite surprised by the fact that there isn't a requirement on an employer who seeks access to the 457 scheme to test the local labour market. Perhaps that is the reason, Deputy Speaker, that in a recent report of the Migration Council and a survey conducted by them, they found that over 15% of employers surveyed said that they probably could find locals to fill the jobs that they were applying for 457 visas for, but they simply didn't try. Now, I make no criticism of the employers for accessing something that is a legal entitlement to them, but I am a little bit critical of the fact that they haven't, at least more than a little bit critical, at least attempted to engage with the local workers, particularly when I reflect upon my own electorate, Deputy Speaker, which has consistently had unemployment rates since the late 1980s of 2% above the national average. And when you focus on certain suburbs, the statistics are above that. And when you look at youth unemployment, the statistics are above that again. The message has got to be quite simple, Deputy Speaker. If we want skilled workers, not just now, but in 5 years' time, if we want skilled tradespeople, not just now, but in 5 years' time, we have to have the mechanisms in place which encourage employers and workers to put on apprentices and trainees to ensure that we are able to fill those skills shortages, not just now, but in the future. Today's commitment to putting in place apprentices and trainees ensures that we don't need to rely on schemes like the 457 scheme so heavily into the future. The second issue that has been identified, Deputy Speaker, is the potential to exploit the precarious nature of a 457 visa worker, including paying below the market rates and the continuity of employment. Put quite simply, if somebody's tenure not only within the workplace but within a country is reliant on their continuous employment with that employer, then their bargaining power within that workplace is less than that of any other worker within that workplace. And the third issue that we've identified as a weakness within the scheme is that I've already addressed, and that is the requirement to meet training obligations that are a condition upon the granting of the 457 visa. We never heard much about this from the member for Canning or any of the other speakers that I've tuned into, Deputy Speaker. And when pointed out like that, it is a fairly simple proposition. Test the local labour market, prove that there is no current worker who is ready, willing and able to fill that vacancy. No local worker ready, willing and able to fill that vacancy. Having engaged a worker on a 457 visa, ensure that you meet the conditions. Ensure that you meet the conditions of that visa, being ensuring that they are paid market rates and the continuity of employment. They're treated fairly in the workplace, and that you're meeting the training requirements. Deputy Speaker, there is a good reason why the member for Canning and others didn't reflect too heavily upon these propositions within the amendment before the House. A very good reason, and the reason is that their record on this particular issue is not very good, because under the Howard government we saw significant abuses within the scheme. Between 2003 and 2006, Deputy Speaker, we know that over 30% of all 457's visas granted were at or below the minimum, were granted at below the minimum gazetted rate. So we heard the member for Canning just now, in response to a question put by the member for Scullin, saying that he has always supported workers being paid the market rate. Well, Deputy Speaker, under their watch, that wasn't what was occurring. Over 30% of the workers who were engaged under the 457 class of visas were being paid at below the minimum gazetted rate. And I want to make the point, Deputy Speaker, that's not the minimum market rate, that's the minimum gazetted rate. So you had two classes of workers within a workplace and the exploitation of workers on these class of visas. Deputy Speaker, inspections between 2002 and 2003, and this is reports conducted under the former government, inspections conducted between 2002 and 2003 of over 2,400 work sites showed that there was around 27% of those people who were engaged under those schemes the employers were breaching the conditions of that visa. So for the member for Canning and others on that side of the House to say nothing to see here, move on, well, I can understand why they make that submission, Deputy Speaker. The reason that they make that submission is that their track record in this area is not very good at all. It's why they're so anxious. It's why they are so anxious to address the central proposition which is before the House. That central proposition is this: if there is a local worker who is ready, willing and able to fill a vacancy that an employer needs to fill, then they should be given first crack at that job. Deputy Speaker, you could be forgiven for thinking, on listening to the contributions of the Shadow Minister and others after him, that Australia was somehow operating on a folly, out on its own, doing something which is completely out of step with other countries around, similar countries around the world. Well, Deputy Speaker, can I just inform the House this, that not 4 weeks ago in the Canadian Parliament, the Prime Minister of that country stood up and said that we need to amend our class of visa, which operates in the same way as our 457 visa scheme, for the very same reasons that we've identified here. The Canadian Prime Minister, more closely aligned to those on the Conservative side of politics than ours, Deputy Speaker, had this to say. He said that if there are local workers who could fill a job, who could fill a vacancy, they should be given first crack at the job before employers go to the Canadian government and seek to bring in workers from overseas to fill that vacancy. And he was supported by the then Governor of the Reserve Bank of Canada, the Central Bank of Canada, in that proposition, who made a public speech supporting the same proposition, Deputy Speaker. So far from this being some harebrained proposition dreamt up as a conspiracy within a cave, this is a proposition which is in step with all other countries and around the world. And can I make this final proposition, Deputy Speaker, for those opposite, to sit there on that side of the House and bag other countries, talk about humanitarian debacles in countries like Malaysia, whip up fear about foreign investment in this country, to accuse and to run the most humongous scare around refugees in this country. To turn to this side of the House and talk about introducing the issue of xenophobia into debate, I've got to say, Deputy Speaker, it's about the richest thing that I've heard in my time in this place. Order.